What is the price of a memory? What does it cost to erase a people from their own story? This is a map of Iraq. You see the Tigris River? You see the Euphrates River? The cradle of civilization. But you are about to see a different map. A map of a ghost that was once a king, Nimrod to be exact. A ghost that once led a rebellion so powerful it toppled empires. A ghost that now lives his life under a single, brutal word, Abid. This is the story of the most dramatic fall in human history, or at least one of them. Is a lot, okay? A journey from the heights of founding legend to the depths of invisible oppression. How does a people go from building the Tower of Babel to being the foundation another civilization is built upon? This is the story of a rebellion that built a nation, a dictator who tried to bury it, and a war that sealed its fate. This is what happened to the black people in Iraq. Before the word Abid existed, there was the word king. And in the oldest stories told about this very soil, that king was black. His name was Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. A figure so colossal, he straddles the Bible and the Quran. Pause, okay? I said straddle. I'm not really supposed to say that. It deserves a pause, okay? This is the man that scripture says looked at the plains of Shinar and commanded his people to build, to create a city with a tower so high it could punch a hole in the sky. The Tower of Babel. Now, let that image burn in your mind just for a second. A black ruler leading one of humanity's first and most ambitious acts of engineering and nation building, right there in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization itself. Now, you can debate the theology, you can question the legend all you want, but what you cannot debate is the persistent, haunting shadow this story casts. For centuries, Arab and Hebrew historians consistently describe Nimrod as a Cushite, a black man from the lands of Ethiopia and Eritrea. He is woven into the deepest fabric of this region's identity, and the legends don't stop there. Scholars like Runoko Rashidi point to the Sumerians, the people who invented writing, who built the first cities, who called themselves the black-headed people, a simple, descriptive term that echoes through millennia. The point is this. Whether in sacred text or academic debate, the story of Iraq is inextricably linked to a foundational black presence, to black ambition, to black authority. This was a cornerstone, and you don't erase a cornerstone with a few centuries of slavery. You just build a new house on top of it and hope nobody checks the foundation. But then I pop up to audit the whole world. There's no escaping judgment now. A new empire, the Abbasid Caliphate, now ruled from Baghdad. And it had an insatiable appetite for two things: sugarcane and the labor to farm it. Their solution arrived on ships from the east. This was the Indian Ocean slave trade, a network of human misery that dwarfed even the Atlantic trade in its duration. For over 1,000 years, Arab slavers carved a path down the East African coast, from Kenya to Mozambique, from Zanzibar to the Congo. Their human cargo had a name: the Zanj, a word pulled from the Arab name for the coast itself, Zanzibar. It didn't mean person, it meant product from a specific region, a receipt for a human being. They were marched to the coast, packed into the holds of the boats, and shipped across the ocean to the underbelly of the empire, the salt marshes and sugar plantations of southern Iraq. This was quite literally hell. Their job was to drain the lethal salt from the marshes, making the land fertile for the caliphate's cash crops. The sun was a weapon. The brackish water was poison. Malaria was a constant sentence. They were worked to death, their life expectancy measured in seasons. They were disposable equipment, but a machine that thinks for itself becomes a weapon eventually, always, okay? In 869 AD, the weapon found its trigger, a man named Ali ibn Muhammad, a revolutionary who saw enslaved people as a potential army. And he gave them an idea so dangerous it was contagious, that their freedom wasn't something to be given. The Zanj Rebellion wasn't a protest, it was a war, and it was one of the most successful slave revolts in all of human history. For 14 years, they waged a guerrilla war from the very marshes that were meant to be their grave. They mastered the terrain, built a navy, and forged a government. They took Basra, one of the largest port cities in the world. They seized its treasury, its weapons, its ships. And then they did the unthinkable. They built their own capital, a city called Al-Mukhtara, which means the chosen one. For 14 years, Al-Mukhtara was the capital of a sovereign black state in the heart of Iraq, with its own laws, its own economy, and its own army. The Zanj had reached a height of power that hadn't been seen since the legends of Nimrod. They were no longer the slaves of Iraq. They were one of its most powerful political forces. And that is exactly why the Abbasid Empire had to step it up and get rid of them. The Caliphate assembled one of the largest armies in its history. They laid siege to Al-Mukhtara, and when the walls finally fell, the revenge was absolute. The rebellion was drowned in its own blood. The leaders were executed. The city was raided. Its memory scrubbed from the land. The message was carved into the consciousness of Black Iraq for 1,000 years. Ambition will be met with annihilation. The fall from state builders back to property was instant. The long, dark winter of erasure had begun. After the fall of Al-Mukhtara, the empire ensured such a rebellion could never happen again. The Abbasids intensified their control, embedding the status of Black Iraqis as a permanent terrorized underclass. Slavery persisted, but now under the watchful eye of a state that had learned the cost of Black anger. As empires shifted from Abbasid to the Ottomans, the machine simply got a new manager. The Ottomans bureaucratized the caste system. They codified the social hierarchies, and Black Iraqis remained legally, socially, and economically at the bottom, largely confined to roles as servants, laborers, and entertainers. The term Abid shifted from a description of a status to a harsh social brand, a constant reminder of their designated place. Then came the 20th century, and with it, the most insidious tool of erasure yet, the modern nation state. With the British mandate in the creation of modern Iraq, a new form of invisibility was engineered. The new state, dominated by Arab nationalist ideologies, aggressively promoted a homogenous identity that had no room for being Black. In the drawing of borders and the writing of national histories, Black Iraqis were not considered a distinct ethnic group with rights, but an anomaly to be assimilated, a problem to be solved by silence. The stage was now set for the final, most efficient phase of the machine. The blueprint for total erasure was complete. All it needed was the right man to implement it. That man was Saddam Hussein. His Ba'ath political party took the ancient tools of caste and prejudice and plugged them into the modern machinery of the totalitarian state. Their ideology was a violent state-enforced pan-Arabism, a single story for a single people. To be a true Iraqi was to be an Arab. And in Saddam's Iraq, Blackness was the ultimate contradiction to that story. It was a problem to be solved, and he had a final solution. It was a two-pronged attack. First, cultural and historical annihilation. The state systematically scrubbed their past from the public record. The story of the Zanj, a dangerous tale of rebellion that cannot be tolerated. The legacy of Nimrod, an inconvenient truth that undermined the myth of a purely Arab homeland. School curricula, media, every organ of the state was purged. The goal was to create a people with no past and therefore no claim to a future. Second, economic and physical containment. The Black population was overwhelmingly concentrated in the South, the same land sitting atop Iraq's vast ocean of oil. A mobilized, potentially conscious Black community was an existential threat to the regime's absolute control over that prize. So they were denied every path to power. Political representation? No. Economic mobility? Systematically blocked, then funneled into jobs as street cleaners and entertainers. Any whisper of dissent was met with the boot of the Mukhabarat, the secret police. Organizing was a death sentence. Asking for rights was an act of treason. Under Saddam, the term Abid became more than a slur. It was a state-sanctioned racial category. The machine, refined over 1,000 years, was now running at peak efficiency. The ghost of Al-Mukhtara had been silenced, or so they thought. In 2003, America invaded Iraq, looking for weapons of mass destruction. Except that's not why they were there. Okay, we'll talk about that in another video. But they did overthrow Saddam Hussein, and when Saddam failed, the cage he built didn't magically disappear. It just lost its leader, okay? The whole country lost its leader. And the door swung open to something arguably worse, chaos on several fronts. The invasion that promised liberation delivered a different kind of freedom. The freedom to be forgotten in plain sight for Black Iraqis. As the country descended into sectarian civil war, brutal calculus took hold. Political power was divided along ancient lines, Shia, Sunni, Kurd. But in this new map of survival, there was no equation for Black, no quota, no seat at the table. You had to be Arab. The same systemic marginalization that Saddam enforced with the secret police baton now continued under the indifferent hand of a fractured, dysfunctional government. They were still locked out of political office, still funneled into menial labor, still living in the segregated neighborhoods of the South. And then came the ultimate insult of erasure, the census. Even after Saddam, the state refused to count them. To further enforce the pan-Arabism, the census does not collect ethnicity data. Everyone is just Arab. But Afro-Iraqi leaders claim the number is somewhere between 1 to 2 million people. The machine Saddam perfected was now on autopilot, humming along without needing a dictator to run it. The oppression had become decentralized, democratic. Everyone was in charge, which meant no one was responsible. But in that chaos, a ghost from 1,000 years ago finally stirred. In 2007, in a toxic, chaotic aftermath of the American invasion, a man named Jalal Thiyab did the impossible. He reached back through 1,000 years of silence and grabbed the ghost of Al-Mukhtara by the hand. He founded the Free Iraqi movement. Free, right? It was a direct, defiant callback to the Zanj Rebellion. At least that's what he wanted, okay? A reclamation of a revolution that had been buried in the marsh mud. This was not a charity. This was not a cultural club. This was a political party, the first in Iraqi history dedicated to black rights. Thiyab was trying to rebuild a political Al-Mukhtara, not with walls of clay, but with voter rolls and political platforms. For a moment, it worked. He mobilized a community the state said didn't exist. He gave a voice to the people it said had nothing to say. And for that, in 2013, he was assassinated. A bullet became the final argument against their visibility. The message, echoing down from the 9th century, was the same. This system, in any of its forms, cannot tolerate the threat of a politically organized black populace. The story of King Nimrod is a legend. The story of the Zanj is in the history books. But the story of Jalal Thiyab is on a casualty list. It's in an unmarked grave of a man who dared to remember what his country tried to forget. But they could never kill the spirit. While politicians built walls and militants built bombs, Black Iraqis were preserving the one thing no army could defeat: their culture. And the drums, the dances, the healing ceremonies known as Nuban, the memory of who they were survived. The spirit is the unbroken thread from the heart of Africa to the marshes of Basra, from the courts of Nimrod to the ruins of Al-Mukhtara to the streets of modern Basra. It's a defiant spirit that refuses to be silenced. A history written in a language deeper than words. It remembers what the history books choose to forget. So, what happened to the black people in Iraq? They were the price paid for an empire, the necessary sacrifice for a national story that required their silence. From the legendary ambition of Nimrod's tower to the revolutionary sovereignty of Al-Mukhtara to the silenced microphone of Jalal Thiyab, the thread is one of relentless resistance against the machinery of erasure 1,000 years in the making. They were told they were nothing but slaves, a people without a past and therefore without a future. But the spirit remembers. The drums in the streets of Basra remember the heartbeats of the Zanj. The soil of the South remembers the blood of kings and revolutionaries. A ghost is not a thing that is dead. A ghost is a memory that refuses to die. It is a truth that haunts the house of lies, and the ghost of Black Iraq is stirring. It is stirring in the children who now learn the true story of the Zanj. It is stirring in the artists who weave their heritage into their music. It is stirring in the activists who continue the work that Jalal Thiyab began. The fall to captives may be one of history's greatest tragedies, but it is not the end of the story. It is merely the end of a chapter, because ghosts have a way of remembering that they were once leaders, and leaders do not stay buried forever. Like Britain, because they dug up all the fucking pharaohs. I'm just saying, man. It was like the Ottomans, the British, and to Saddam, right? So they were complicit in this shit too. Britain had a way of going into these nations and really setting up this whole divide and conquer shit. Like, they did this shit well, especially in all these Middle Eastern nations, which is really just Asian nations, right? Asian or Africa, they're right there, right? But especially in these Middle Eastern nations or African nations where there was a sizable Arab population. Wherever there was a sizable Arab population mixed with black populations in Africa, it was like Britain came in. Britain was like, hey, first, Britain act nice, okay? This is how it works. They come in, we're going to trade with you, do all this, and then they start pulling in the weapons and the guns. It's like, okay, well, we kind of want you to do this. Then they start putting certain people in power, and these people in power start doing the acts for them, so they don't really have to get their hands dirty anymore. And they chose to put the Arabs in power, and then Arabs start pushing this pan-Arabism. So Britain does this. They did it, like, literally the same thing that happened in Iraq is the same thing that's, like, currently happening in Sudan because of Britain. Like, Britain had this exact same effect on Sudan. This has been Adonis Black Show, man. Thank you for watching. I will see you next video. Peace.